Very intelligent people do not tire of simplicity. They get exhausted from having to shrink their own minds to fit into shallow conversations. There is a very common idea, almost a consensus in our society, that those who prefer to keep to themselves are, at the very least, snobs. If you refuse an invitation to an after-work happy hour or prefer to spend the holiday at home instead of going to that crowded backyard barbecue at the neighbor's, the label comes quickly. You are arrogant, cold, or simply do not like people. In the United States, where the culture of extroversion, constant networking, and small talk is almost a rule for survival, not always smiling and starting conversations can easily make you look like the villain of the story. But psychology shows a completely different reality. In the vast majority of times, this withdrawal does not stem from contempt or an inflated ego, but rather from an absolute need for emotional survival. The truth is that people with a higher level of intelligence have a mental configuration that processes the world in a very particular way. They are not distancing themselves because they think they are superior. They are just trying to preserve their own sanity and energy. The intelligent brain is like a supercomputer that never turns off, and the cost of keeping this machine running in shallow environments is extremely high. When you understand that distancing is actually a defense mechanism and not an attack, everything starts to make sense. And what really drains this mental battery is not the simple presence of others, but the invisible effort that happens behind the scenes of the mind, which leads us directly to understand how this constant reading that the brain does without anyone noticing works. Imagine you walk into a room for one of those typical HOA condo meetings, homeowners association, or a casual meetup with coworkers near the coffee machine. For most people, it is just another ordinary moment of the day. They hear the words being said, smile, respond on autopilot, and move on with their lives. But for a highly intelligent mind, the experience is completely different. Their level of awareness works like an extremely sensitive radar that picks up absolutely everything between the lines. They do not just hear "good morning." They notice the micro-expression of discomfort, the hidden tension between two neighbors pretending to get along, the passive-aggressive tone disguised as a joke, and the invisible power and ego games dominating the room. It is as if most people watch a movie focusing only on the main dialogue, while the intelligent person simultaneously analyzes the soundtrack, lighting, background body language, and the director's hidden intentions. This excess perception happens on autopilot, and processing this mountain of social data in real time has a very high cost. It requires brutal mental effort. You absorb the emotional climate of the environment, whether it is hidden competition, constant complaining, or corporate fakery, and your brain tries to decode and adapt to all of it instantly. Staying in these environments is not just boring. It is physically and mentally exhausting. The social battery drops quickly not because the person is weak or antisocial, but because their internal processor is running at maximum capacity all the time, dealing with information others do not even know exists. And when this hypervigilant radar clashes with the social obligation to interact about topics that go nowhere, exhaustion reaches a critical level. Which brings us to the next big villain of this story, the true agony of trying to survive a dialogue with no depth at all. There is a gigantic cultural pressure, especially in American culture, to master the art of small talk. It is almost mandatory to know how to make small talk about the unpredictable weather, the endless traffic of the I-405, who is most likely to reach the Super Bowl, or the latest gossip about the celebrity of the moment. For the vast majority of people, this is the perfect social lubricant. It is comfortable, safe, creates quick bonds, and requires almost no mental effort. But for a highly intelligent mind, being forced to participate in interactions that revolve exclusively around trivialities or other people's lives is the equivalent of making the engine of a high-performance sports car drive at 10 kilometers per hour in a traffic jam. Social psychology frequently highlights that individuals with great reflective capacity absurdly value the quality of intellectual exchange. They do not just want to talk about isolated events or people. Their minds thirst to talk about ideas, deep concepts, behavior patterns, science, philosophy, or the future. When the conversation comes down to empty complaints, superficial judgments, or repetitive discussions about the price of a gallon of gas, an almost physical tiredness emerges. The intelligent brain literally suffers from a lack of stimulus. The mind needs a real exchange, and when that does not happen, it starts to shut down. To make matters worse, the intelligent person has full social awareness that they cannot simply turn their back and walk away, as this would be seen as arrogance. So, what do? They wear the mask of normality. They force a smile, nod in agreement, ask generic follow-up questions, and spend an absurd amount of vital energy sustaining a social persona just to not break the group's harmony. Playing this character full-time generates terrible emotional exhaustion. In these cases, silence becomes infinitely more attractive than presence. But this fatigue reaches an even more critical and often unsustainable level when, besides constant superficiality, the environment becomes dominated by behaviors that defy reason itself. If there is one thing that gives a true blue screen to the brain of a highly intelligent person, it is incoherence. Sharp minds are, by nature, pattern recognition machines. They seek logic, consistency, and cause and effect. So, the level of internal frustration, when they are forced to live daily with people who say one thing but do exactly the opposite. It is that coworker who spends the whole year complaining that the boss does not value them, but spends half the shift scrolling through their phone feed. Or that friend who cries on your shoulder, saying they are drowning in student and credit card debt, but the following weekend shows up in your driveway with a brand new F-150 pickup truck, financed over 84 months with absurd interest rates. For the vast majority, these contradictions go unnoticed or are justified as just life things. But for an analytical mind, dealing with other people's illogic generates a painful mental friction. The intelligent person can spot the problem, draw the logical solution in 3 simple steps, and predict the catastrophic consequences of that mistake in a matter of seconds. The great dilemma is that ordinary people, most of the time, do not want a solution. They just want to transfer responsibilities, complain about the economy, or play the victim. Trying to rationalize someone's irrational behavior is a gigantic drain of energy. It is like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole every day. The intelligent person quickly learns that using logic in environments dominated by irrational impulses solves nothing. It only drains their own battery. Maintaining proximity to this cyclical pattern of bad choices becomes unsustainable. And worst of all is that, contrary to the classic stereotype that logical minds are cold and calculating, the difficulty in dealing with these situations hides a much more complex personality trait, which leads us directly to understand the true weight of carrying a burden that is not yours. Perhaps the biggest mistake ever made when it comes to intelligent people is confusing them with cold, calculating machines or insensitive geniuses, the kind that borders on sociopathy. Hollywood movies love to portray the antisocial scientist with zero empathy. This is a very serious untruth. Psychology has increasingly shown that above-average intelligence is frequently accompanied by a gigantic capacity for deep empathy. It is the so-called excess of sensing or hypersensitivity. Very sharp minds feel people's problems intensely and absorb ambient emotions like living sponges. But it is not just about feeling. The great wear and tear comes from the fact that, when someone vents about a pain, the intelligent person does not just cry along. Their mind goes into immediate overdrive mode. They can see the suffering from multiple perspectives, map the emotional roots that led to that tension point, and already mentally visualize the 2 or 3 escape routes or the ramifications of an action to get out of the hole. They feel the other's pain and care viscerally. However, that is where exhaustion attacks in a brutal way. The vast majority of people vent not to solve an emotional pain, but only to relieve themselves momentarily, and often they love drama for the sake of drama. Imagine the overload of being connected at such a deep level of empathy and investing vital energy thinking about the solution to a serious problem, only for the person to return the following week with the exact same whining or refusing to take control of the situation, absorbing others' tensions and the burden of unbalanced relationships without seeing any real evolution on the other side is what leads directly to empathic exhaustion. This excess of invisible weight often forces the intelligent person's nervous system to pull a sudden brake so as not to become mentally ill, which leads us to the only effective escape valve left: healing through the absence of stimuli. When the exhaustion of processing micro-expressions, holding the social mask, dealing with people's incoherence, and absorbing the emotional load of everyone around reaches a critical limit, the highly intelligent brain demands an immediate intervention. It gives a very clear and non-negotiable command: step away, seek silence, drastically reduce any source of human stimulus, and hide in one's own refuge. This behavior is frequently misinterpreted as depression, severe antisociality, or even a diva fit. After all, American social pressure, especially in the workplace or suburban neighborhood culture, always demands that you be available to grab a coffee, do a happy hour, or be smiling at Sunday events and lunches. But the psychological reality is different. This isolation is not pathological. It does not stem from a hatred of people, nor from a desire to feel superior to anyone. The absolute need for isolation is the mental equivalent of plugging your cell phone into the wall outlet when the battery flashes at 1% red. The intelligent brain needs alone time, because it is bombarded with much more information than it can process in real time during social interactions. This time away from everything and everyone is the only way to organize one's thoughts, unload others' emotions that got stuck in the brain's RAM memory, and reset one's own energy. Without silence, mental overload, chronic stress, and the loss of internal balance arise. That is when distancing transforms from a simple escape to a sophisticated survival tactic. The person realizes, in order not to burn out completely in the social gears, they urgently need to learn to turn off their reading machine. And what happens next is often silent, gradual, but definitive. Which leads us to the true lesson of all this: learning to choose the type of energy with whom one should share their most valuable time. And it is exactly at this point that the key turns, and you understand that shrinking your social circle is not a failure in any way. In a culture that constantly measures your worth by the size of your LinkedIn network, the number of event invitations, or your ability to network nonstop, choosing withdrawal seems to go against the grain of success. But, in truth, this is the clearest sign of psychological maturity and wisdom that you can demonstrate. When you finally accept your need for space and stop fighting your own nature just to fit to the people-person mold that society demands, that crushing weight disappears. You realize that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Protecting yourself from relationships and environments that confuse or exhaust your mind is not an act of selfishness. It is pure self-care. True emotional intelligence lies in focusing on absolute quality, not quantity. Having 2 or 3 genuine, deep, and real connections, where you can simply lower your guard and turn off your analytical radar, is worth infinitely more than a schedule packed with superficial acquaintances. In the end, pulling away is not about turning your back on the world with anger or arrogance. It is about getting closer to who you really are, preserving your energy for what actually matters, and choosing to walk away from the noise to find this internal peace is, without a doubt, the smartest attitude you can take.